everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Chia and today we're going to be talking about all the top 5-star books that I read in 2024. I was hoping to do the top 24 of 2024, but as I was going through my Goodreads goals, I didn't realize that I didn't really rate 24 books a 5-star, which I don't know what that means, but at least I got 22 out of it, which I'm very happy about. Don't mind the state of my bookshelf, by the way. There's a lot of books that I had to take off for this video and a bunch of end of the year content I'm filming, so just ignore that, okay? And so let's get started. So this section that I'm gonna start off with is what I call Sarah J. Maas section because I did start to get back into reading in September. I started reading all SJM books in December, and I was kind of going back and forth if I wanted to read her books because I didn't want to fall into the hype. I thought that I wouldn't like a lot of the over popular books, but guess what? I ended up falling in love with her whole entire universe, which is great because I owe credit to Fourth Wing and SJM for getting my spark of passion of love for reading back, and I've been a ferocious reader since that point. I did finish majority of ACOTAR in the end of December, and then I started moving on to Throne of Glass, but the first 5-star book I read in 2024 was Empire Storms. This gave me so much of the feels. I love the ending, and then yes, I did do the tandem read with Tower of Dawn. Thank goodness that I did, because if I didn't, I honestly feel like I would have been bored just reading Tower of Dawn. And also the way this ended with a cliffhanger and everything, I would not have been able to survive reading it individually, because altogether when I read the tandem read, it was like 1200 pages, and that's a lot to get through. I cried so much. I don't want to give any synopsis away because this is the 5th or 6th book in the Throne of Glass series, so I don't want to give too much away, but this book broke my heart, especially the ending, and it gave hope to the readers because of everything that was able to come together, all the people that were able to come together. But at the same time, we lost a integral character in the story. We didn't technically lose, it's just that we kind of ran into a situation with this character. But I'm so happy that I read this as a tandem read. This is one of the books that are my favorite in the whole entire story. And after I read Empire Storms, I swiftly moved on to Kingdom of Ash. This one is over about 980 pages, so it was a long read. It took me about a week and a half to read, but there was a lot of battle scenes. There was a lot of coming together of the different characters that were separated throughout the series. There was a lot of conflicts that were needed to be resolved in this book, especially with how things ended in the last one. There's a bunch of trauma that we start off with, especially this rescue scene we had to go through, and I cried for a majority of the book because of the fact that we lost people, especially since it's a time of war. We lost unexpected people that I'm so sad that we lost, and the ending was so bittersweet because we had to say goodbye to these characters because they are from different parts of this country and they are ruling parties of different sections of the land, so they have to go back home. I am so sad and bittersweet to know that this is the ending of it and I will not be in this world anymore. I'm crossing my fingers that SJM one day decides to write another book in this universe, because I do miss a lot of the people in here, and also we need conclusions to a lot of the characters as well because a lot of them had open-ended endings. Another 5-star read for me, and I can't believe I spent so long not reading this series, and I'm so happy that I did. And then I moved on to the Crescent City series, and the only 5-star I have of the trilogy is House of Sky and Breath. The main reason why I gave this a 5 stars was definitely the ending. If you know, you know. That ending brought so many feels out and I was screaming at the end of it. And I honestly think her urban fantasy books are well written. It's just that a lot of the characters kind of took a downfall in Crescent City 3, but this one was my favorite out of the 3. And then my favorite book of ACOTAR is A Court of Silver Flames. This is the 5th book of the ACOTAR series, and this one follows a different character from all the other books that we follow. It follows Nesta. And at first I was hesitant to read this because reading the first 3 books of ACOTAR, I was not excited to read about Nesta. I just thought she was hurting. I knew that there was a reason why she was hurting, but the way she was backlashing against people, and not only that, we were in Feyre's perspective, so we felt Feyre's hurt whenever Nesta did anything. And also I didn't like how she treated her younger sister when she's the older sister and just let her go off in the wild to fight for food, to fight for things to keep them alive, and they did nothing for I think 10 years. She was not my favorite character whatsoever. And then this this book came along and we saw her perspective. We saw how hurt she was, we saw how insecure she was, and how she felt guilty for the things that she let transpire when she was living with her sisters. And she was mad at her father for not doing anything. I like how her perspective is because she is very similar to me. I feel like when she gets hurt, she tends to push people away, and I kind of tend to do that sometimes, and it's so easy to relate to her. And I was on the other side too for those people who've never wanted to read this, who never wanted to read from Nesta's perspective, but I honestly feel like this is a very integral part of it. Did such a great redemption arc in this book because she learned how to grow, she learned how to individually love and accept herself, and then she fell in love with Cassian. And I love hers and Cassian's relationship, so of course I gave this a 5-star. Granted, this book is a lot spicier than the other ACOTAR books, and it kind of surprised me on how spicy it was because literally every other chapter there was a spicy scene happening. So other than that, I didn't like. I don't mind spice at all, it's just that I don't like an excessive amount of it. But this one, just because of how I related to Nesta so much and how it made me cry at the end, absolutely 5 stars. Okay, now that we're leaving the SJM universe, we are gonna go to the Grishaverse. And then The Crooked Kingdom was my 5-star book of the duology. I loved how it ended. It was such a bittersweet ending again. There were some things that happened to some of the characters that absolutely made me bawl my eyes out, but the growth I see in these characters, I am such a team Kaz and Inez. And granted, they didn't fully profess things to each other that I wanted them to profess. It's just the way they suffered through trauma and the way they went through their past. I don't think we'll ever fully get that, but the way they were willing to let each other in and to let each other know that they are the only two that they care about besides the other rest of the group, of course. But the way this world ended, I read Shadow and Bone last year and I thought it was okay, but it was a great introduction to the Grishaverse. But the moment I stepped into the Six of Crows universe with the 6 characters, I absolutely fell in love. I wanted to be a part of their group so badly. I wanted to be with them to do their high stake missions, and I wanted to be a part of their heist so badly, and I thought this was well done and absolutely 5 stars because the way it concluded, absolutely perfect. The next book I gave a 5-star to was If We Were Villains by ML Rio. This book was one of my favorite books this year because of how well written it was. This follows characters who are part of the school who are centered on doing a drama society and doing a bunch of Shakespeare plays, and they are sort of characters that have met in college and they are all roommates together and they attend classes together. They put on plays every single semester that of course is centered on Shakespeare, and they all speak to each other in Shakespeare lines, and it seems kind of pretentious at first, but once you get into it and start getting into the characters more, I loved it. It's such a great mystery that happens, and then it's dark academia kind of vibes, literary fiction. I love the characters, and as you unravel the mystery of what really happened, it follows a character named Oliver. He's a part of the Shakespeare group. One of the students ends up being found murdered, and this starts off with him 10 years in the future, I believe, and it's him being released from jail. He decides to visit the school one last time before he gets released, and the detective is asking him off the record on what really happened that night. So he slowly tells him what happened, and the things that you expect to have happened didn't at all, and it just starts getting darker and darker as you go on with the story. And I loved how Emil Rio wrote this because it just gets darker and darker, and you just feel the uneasiness of the characters, because as you slowly uncover things that happened that night, you realize whether or not you agree with what happened with that night or you don't agree. And there's also an ending that is open-ended as well, and I absolutely loved it. 5 stars, and I can't wait to read more of Emil Rio's work. My next top book of 2024 was 6 Scorched Roses by Carissa Broadbent. I liked the Nyaxa duology, but I gave it a 4 stars. Wasn't really top reads for me. I did like the characters, but this novella that happened in between the first and second book absolutely got my heart. It's about 200 plus pages. It follows 2 characters named Lilith and Vale. She has sort of a condition that she is slowly dying day by day, and her sister is also having the same condition. So in order to save her sister's life, she decides to go and barter with a vampire, because she, through her experiments, because she's a scientist, she finds that vampire blood has been known to have healing properties in it. So because because of this, she goes to barter with one of the vampires, which is named Vale, and he's a very old school vampire character who lives in like a palace that is dark and dreary. And then she decides to barter with him by giving him 6 magical roses, and throughout these interactions they end up slowly falling in love. And the way they are written, I love the love story between them, the respect they have, the sacrifices they're willing to make for each other despite the fact that she's human and he's a vampire. And I highly recommend reading this novella because they do end up coming into play later on in the series. I think this one was masterfully written by Carissa Broadbent and I highly recommend. Oh, hello? Where the heck? My next top book was Two Twisted Crowns by Rachel Gillig. This one is a part of the Shepherd King duology, and this follows a character who is stuck in a sort of village where she has a nightmare who speaks to her in her head. Some people in her village were struck with a fever and ended up getting magical powers, and unfortunately, because of the king's ruling, if anybody was struck with a fever and came out with magical powers, they were instantly killed or used for his own personal benefits. Because of the fact that Elspeth was struck with the fever, she ends up meeting and falling for the main King Inquisitor, who is named Raven, and also his nephew. They end up falling for each other and he ends up deciding to help her out with everything that's happening. And I absolutely love this series. It's very atmospheric, it's very dark and gothic, and it's a gothic romance. And I think the second book was so well done because it also introduces different character POVs that I didn't even realize that I wanted. And Elm, he's so amazing in this book. Raven and Elm are great in this book, and I loved how they grew as characters in such a short amount of time because it was only a duology. Ended up falling for the character of Nightmare as well because he does come into play later in the duology also. But absolutely love, and I highly recommend this series, especially if you want some dark gothic romance to read during this winter season. My next top book was Happy Place by Emily Henry. Of course I gave this a 5 stars. It emotionally wrecked me throughout the whole entire book, and the moment I got halfway through, it was already a 5-star book because Emily Henry has a way of writing a romance but not making it sort of like the main plot of the book. It gave you different relationships like friendship and how people that you grow up with can change throughout the years. And this whole entire friend group has been meeting with each other every single year for summer since they were in college because of a house one of their friends' families owned. But during this trip they find out that this whole entire place is getting sold, and they start figuring out whether or not that their friendship was tied together by this place or was tied together because of the fact that they love each other. So they have to figure that out. It's about broken friendships, and it's not only about a relationship. And I loved how Emily Henry has written this book. This is so emotional despite the title, and I highly recommend. Next top book I read was Chain of Gold by Cassandra Clare. This is part of the Last Hour series, and it's a part of the Shadowhunters universe. It's one of the most recent series that she's written, and it follows the series of Infernal Devices. I recommend reading Infernal Devices before reading Last Hour series because you will get spoiled with everything that happened in Infernal Devices if you don't read that first. But this one follows the descendants of Infernal Devices, and I didn't think I would love the characters as much, but Cassandra Clare has a way of writing characters that it makes you absolutely fall in love with them. This one is filled with so much angst because 2 of the characters are in love with each other but they just won't admit being in love with each other. Cassandra Clare is known for writing heartbreaking romances in her fantasy books, and it's young adult, but the angst and the slow burn in this book makes my heart break so much. So of course it's a 5-star book. The next 2 books are in the same series, and it's called Yours Truly and Just for the Summer. These are part of interconnected standalones that are part of the Part of Your World trilogy. This book follows a character named Jacob and his love story with Brianna Ortiz. Brianna Ortiz is the best friend of the character in the first book of Part of Your World, and I love how everything was represented in this book. Jacob suffers through social anxiety, and he has trouble conveying his feelings to people because of the fact that he kind of just shuts down, and it's shown through his perspective. And I love the fact that it's anxiety through a male's perspective and how he is constantly in his own head and rethinking everything that happens, and how he speaks to people and how he writes out his feelings because he can't really say into words how he feels. And I completely feel him on that because I do have anxiety as well, and being in his own head reminds me of how much overthinking that we all do. I am so in love with their love story because it was so well written And Brianna gave him so much space to convey his feelings towards her, and she tried her hardest to understand what was going through his head. He comes off rude to her at first. She thinks that he's there to steal her position that she wants of being the head of their department, but turns out that he was just being overly anxious that day, just having a bad day because he lost a couple of patients. He wanted to apologize to her and ends up writing her a letter, and their relationship starts off with them writing letters back and forth to each other. And I love letters being written between two characters. It's so beautifully written, and Abby Jimenez has become my favorite contemporary romance author because, again, I love characters that grow in the book, and also I love multifaceted characters that have different layers to them. This book shows so much complexity of these characters, and I love that it does not only focus on the love story, but it also focuses on how they grow as individuals as well, because they have to overcome certain traumas that they have had to live with all their lives. So 5 stars for this one. And the same reason for this one follows two characters named Justin and Emma. Justin posts a Reddit post saying, "Am I the a-hole?" because he names his dog after his best friend, and asking, is he the a-hole, because his roommate and best friend ends up falling in love with his ex-girlfriend. He doesn't take it seriously, of course, because he has a curse where every single time it breaks up with a girl, that girl ends up finding the love of her life afterwards. Emma responds saying that she has the same curse as well, so they decide to meet in person and try to fake date to cancel out the curse with each other, and she ends up flying over to Minnesota, where the whole entire series is set, so that they can start a fake dating relationship so they can cancel the curse out. And of course, they end up falling for each other. I love Justin and Emma so much. Emma has so much trauma, and she's a traveling nurse, and she has a lot of abandonment issues, and a lot of the abandonment issues start coming to head in this book, and she realizes that a lot of things have to be done in her head mentally and individually before she can fully have a relationship with Justin. And Justin is going through his own troubles because, unfortunately, because of a embezzling case that his mom ends up going through, he becomes the primary custody of his 3 younger siblings, so he insta becomes a parent overnight, so he has to deal with that while falling for Emma as well. And I just love how this was written as well, and the way that everything comes together at the end, because it is interconnected standalones with part of your world, but I highly recommend reading them all together in order because of the way that things end and how everything comes together. The way you feel for these characters will be more strong if you read the other books in this series. And then I also rated Funny Story by Emily Henry a 5-star. This is her most recent release. It follows a character named Daphne who is a librarian, and she lives in Michigan, and she had a engagement going on. Unfortunately, her engagement falls through. Her fiance Peter ends up coming back from his bachelor trip saying that he confessed his feelings to his childhood best friend, and they are moving forward by moving in with each other, and they are falling in love. So she has no place to stay, and the only reason why she moved to Michigan was to be with her fiance. And so she kind of has life of her own over there besides her job, and so she all of a sudden out of a place to stay. So she ends up moving in with Miles, who is the ex-boyfriend of Petra, who Peter fell in love with and is also his childhood best friend. And I love the way that Emily Henry wrote this, because Daphne not only focuses on falling for Miles, but she also focuses on finding her own life in Michigan. She starts reaching out to other people because the only friends she had over the past few years while she was with Peter was Peter's friends, and unfortunately, because they did break up, she lost all those friends. And I love how she grows in this, and I love that she is a librarian of a children's section in her library and the little events that she organizes. And Miles is such a golden retriever boyfriend. He's very kind to her, he's very thoughtful. There is one thing that he does at the end that is a part of the 3rd act conflict that I kind of didn't like, but the way it was written, how it's resolved, gave me 5-star feelings. My next top book was Daisy Hates and the Great Undoing. I absolutely fell in love with the Magnolia Parks universe this year, and I fell in love with Daisy Hates because she's the other perspective in this book. I love that she comes from sort of a mom background and her love story with Christian Hemmett, and this one is so torturous of an ending because we still don't have the last 2 books of Daisy Hates a series. The most recent one was a part of the Magnolia Parks part of the book where it ended her and BJ's story, and this one is following Daisy Hates and her love story with Christian Hemmett and her brother Julian Hates, who is amazing as well. I love being in his head, such a good character, and I'm waiting waiting for the last 2 books to be released because I want to see the conclusion to their story. And Jessa Hastings has a way of writing characters that are so in-depth, and despite the fact they come from unrelatable backgrounds like mobster, rich backgrounds, you find a way to relate to them anyways because of how they feel. My next top book is Red Rising by Pierce Brown. This is sort of like a fantasy with a little bit of sci-fi thrown into the plot as well, and this one follows a character named Darrow. The whole entire society is divided into different colored class system, and he is a part of the lowest class system, which is the Reds, and he works as a hell diver for the Reds. Hell divers basically go around Mars to find livable habitats for, of course, the highest tiers, which are golds. And unfortunately, because of one tragic thing that happened, Darrow ends up sort of joining a rebellious group to infiltrate the golds in order for them to break down the golds from within. And he ends up going to this academy, and the academy has to do this sort of living situation where they all go through and live in nature and have to find ways to survive, and they basically go through big battles with the different sections of their golds, and it's such a fun read. It's very reminiscent of Lord of the Flies. Lord of the Flies, where they have to find ways to survive and they end up hurting each other, and it's just a wild ride. It's going to be a part of a 7-book series. There are currently 6 books out right now, and it just gets more convoluted as the series goes on. I haven't read the 2nd book yet. I have it on my shelf. I am determined to read the rest of the series next year because I heard that Pierce Brown might be releasing the last book in the series next year, so I can't wait to keep reading. My next top book is Magnolia Park's Into the Dark by Jessa Hastings, and this book is the ending of BJ's and Magnolia's love story, and this one is going to be the last one and told from their perspectives, and I'm so sad to be saying goodbye to them because it's very bittersweet. There is something that happens in the previous one, the Long Way Home book, that they are reeling from in this book. And at first, when I first read the Magnolia Parks books, I thought BJ and Magnolia were very toxic with each other, and I did not see them surviving. But the way they grew with each other, the way they decided to go through therapy, and because they loved each other so much that they didn't want to lose each other, I loved the way this book ended. It was so bittersweet. I'm so sad to see them leave. I can't wait to continue with the series to finish Daisy and Christian's story and Julian's story. Despite how sad it was, there was a very good happy ending, and I'm so happy that it ended this way. My next 5-star was a really big surprise to me, and it was Quicksilver by Callie Hart. This is an indie published book. It took the book world by storm. This one is such an easy bingeable read, the way Kingfisher is, and also Ceres is, she's human, but she ends up falling into sort of a portal that takes her to the Fate world, and she ends up getting into trouble with Kingfisher. Kingfisher ends up having to protect her and having to deal with her to learn how to manipulate metals in this world because she's an alchemist. And she learns she's an alchemist when she falls through the portal and basically helps her out to help her learn how to do this. And the way they banter back and forth, I love how this ended into such a huge cliffhanger. I can't wait till Callie Hart continues on with the rest of the series. I'm so excited to see how the series goes because of the way it ended and how there's a different new type of creature that was introduced in this book. And I love their love story so much, and the world is expansive. It's sort of like fae and vampires and everything else in between, and I can't wait to read more. The next 2 books are a part of the same series, Reign of Shadows and Endings and Storm of Secrets and Sorrows by Melissa K. Rourke. I absolutely raved about this whole entire series over the past few months. I think Melissa K. Rourke has a way of writing that makes you so involved into the world, and I love how unique her world is. It's a very fae source legacy kind of thing, and legacies have to take on a source, which are the faes. Theon is a lord of one of these kingdoms, and Theon ends up choosing to take Tessa as a source. And of course, she is very reluctant. She's very rebellious. She has a reckless spirit, and of course this comes into play because of how she ends up having to go against everything that he's trying to teach her to do. And it's very character based, and you're gonna hate a lot of the characters in these books because I did, but I already knew to trust the process with Melissa K. Rourke because there are some characters in here that you absolutely hate to begin with. Theon, he is terrible, and these were my 2 5-star books of the series. And I also gave the 3rd book that came out, Tempest of Wrath and Vengeance, a 5 stars as well. I can't wait to see how that whole entire series is going to end. It is a 4-book series, and the 4th book is set to release in August of 2025. I'm so excited / sad to see the series go because I fell in love with the characters so much, and I love how it's very unique and how the complexity of the characters come into play a lot. It's a very character study based, and the fantasy world is so unique. I can't wait to finish the series. My last top book of the year, actually I read this December because I was looking for short books that I wanted to read in November novellas that I wanted to read because I was trying to reach my reading goal, and I was also trying to not deep dive into big fantasies currently because I just didn't have the energy or the brain power to do that right now. So I decided to pick up a novella, and this novella is a part of the Not So Meet Cute series. I think that's what it's called, and it's a bunch of different romance authors come together and write different little novellas. And the first one I read was by Christina Lauren, named The Exception to the Rule, and this follows two characters who ends up trying to